What do you call a group of people that support sending weapons to Ukraine, that are also okay with Ukraine giving up territory to end the war with Russia, but could be on board with sending even more weapons if that meant that it would give Ukraine the strength to force Russia to the negotiating table? How about the average American voter? We're messy, complicated, and probably have conflicting views in more ways than one, myself included. But we got an interesting poll today that I wanted to run through that'll all be linked in the description below from the Ronald Reagan Institute, diving into some of these questions that are honestly like the answers are not at all what I expected. And one of them that I've never seen asked anywhere else was talking to people that are against providing aid to Ukraine. And they said, why and what would make you change your mind? Seems important, right? Maybe something that we should have jumped on a while ago. But either way, this is a poll called the U.S. National Survey of Foreign Policy Attitudes on behalf of the Ronald Reagan Institute. They sampled 2,510 U.S. adults between November 8th and 14th, 2024. That means it was right after Trump was elected. The reason I thought this one specifically was worth digging into was not just because they asked a lot of questions that I haven't seen asked anywhere else, but also the breakdown of people that they asked was pretty evenly split between political parties. I mean, jumping way down to question 114, they said that 41% of respondents voted for Trump, 39% voted for Harris. That's pretty much in line with how the election turned out. Or at least it's close, right? Hard to ask for much more than that. And they even dug a little deeper to the ones who voted for Trump or said they had Republican leanings. 74% of those said that they consider themselves a supporter of the Make America Great Again or MAGA movement. So, I feel like this is pretty representative of the people that put Trump in office, right? Which seems like the group to look to right now is trying to figure out what his foreign policy might look like in the coming years. Additionally, the Ronald Reagan Institute is a right-leaning organization, understandably so. So it's going to be a group that has some degree of sway either with Trump or his cabinet members or at least the overall administration. Now, diving in, I want to stay pretty high level and just kind of level set here that we're going to focus, as would be expected, on national security and foreign policy, but the average American voter, this is way down in their priority list, right? I mean, even in this questionnaire, which they did just go broadly out there, it wasn't looking at people already interested in these subjects, but we've got 1% says their top issue is foreign aid, 2% is promoting freedom abroad. The top ones, as you would expect, healthcare, border security, social security, education, no change there. All right, before diving into the serious stuff, kind of a goofy one here, they asked the respondents, what percentage do you think of the federal budget is spent on national defense each year? And it was an open answer. You just write down any number. And they did. And look, honestly, I had to look this up. It's around 13%, and I know it's kind of probably squishy with how people define these different things. But, props to the people here that answered that just on the spot. Anywhere between like 6 and 20%. Pretty impressive, all things considered. But we've got 21% of respondents said that we were spending 51% or greater on national defense. 5% said it was more than 76%. Could you imagine if we spent more than 76% of our federal budget on defense? It'd be F-35s for everybody, for days, right? Could you imagine what our military looked like if that was our annual spending? But either way, that's not all that important compared to the rest of the survey. Let's start with Ukraine. We'll bounce around. We've got some stuff on China, overall allies with the United States, and then some on Israel and the Middle East. So starting with Ukraine, they say, who do you think is currently winning the war between Russia and Ukraine? Not a big change here, but they have 41% for Russia, 24% for Ukraine. It's interesting that more people today think Ukraine is winning the war than in May of 2024. The only real big change that we've seen there is Ukraine kicked off their Kursk operation, but they've been losing territory in Kursk ever since then. It's just interesting. We've got more people voting saying Russia is winning as well, but nonetheless, minor change, not drastically different than what I would expect there. And then they get into, do you support or oppose sending U.S. weapons to Ukraine? 55% support, 35% oppose. That's a big difference. 55 to 35 is pretty convincingly yes. But the next question is what I thought was really important here and one that I've not seen really asked elsewhere. So they said, what are the reasons that you oppose sending aid to Ukraine? And they run down a whole list here. The number one issue, getting 33% of the response, again, of the people who said, no, I oppose sending aid to Ukraine, they say the conflict does not concern the United States and we should stay out. That's 33% of respondents. The next one down, 20% said sending aid costs too much money. 18% said sending aid will escalate the conflict and provoke Russia. 13% said sending aid will make the conflict drag on longer. 6% said it depletes U.S. stockpiles, and 4% said it's a waste because Russia will eventually win. I thought the stockpile one was interesting because I feel like I see that raised to the surface a lot. But even in this case, you're talking about a very, very small percentage of people that look at that as the number one reason why they would oppose sending aid to Ukraine. Now, this next part, I feel like should be front page news and should have been a long time ago. What they did was they said, for those of you that are opposed to sending aid to Ukraine, what if? And they gave a condition. So in this case, they said, if you heard from someone you trust that blank, and they give 1 through 6 here, would you be more likely to support sending U.S. weapons to Ukraine, less likely, or make no difference? It's kind of complicated, but essentially it's a condition. If that condition was met, would you feel differently? And the biggest change here was number 5. They say, if you heard that U.S. military leaders believe the right aid package can give Ukraine enough strength that Russia will be forced to negotiate for peace. 46% of people who originally said no said that could sway me into saying, okay, we should send more aid. There's the messaging right there. It's if we think that the aid is going towards an end goal, to accomplish a mission, we have an end state, we know what this is driving towards, 46% of people who originally said no transition over to say, okay, let's send those weapons, let's bring this thing to a close. The lowest one, only 24%, came across when that statement was aid to Ukraine is less than 1% of the military's annual budget. So look, it still pulled 24% of people over, but that was the least impactful aspect of all of this. And it makes sense. We're talking about such big numbers when whether it's Ukraine aid or the federal budget or the defense budget, whatever it is, it's like make-believe money to all of us, like average citizens. It's hard to fathom that amount. So even when you're talking about how it's less than 1% of the military's annual budget, I mean, we just a second ago talked about how much money the government spends on defense at baseline. It's a silly amount to begin with. So it's understandable that you get into those numbers, it's probably going to lose some people. But this one was probably the most telling to me, that with the right messaging, not narrative, not propaganda, anything like that, just the right messaging can change people's minds on this. And I think this is somewhere where a lot of people, probably myself included, have fallen short in the last couple of years and really signifying why the aid is important and what it can accomplish in this war. Now, wrapping up here with Ukraine, they said, do you support or oppose each of the following? 52% support Ukraine firing missiles at targets inside of Russia. 52 support, 35 oppose. But 59% Ukraine negotiating for peace, even if it means giving up some territory to Russia. It's 59% to 30%. It'd be interesting to see kind of how that's changed over time. My guess is that second one hasn't changed all that much. But either way, in some of the questions, they do have kind of historical data. It looks like in this case, that's the first time they've asked both of those questions. Now, moving to more kind of general national security, foreign affairs questions, then we'll get into China. They say, when it comes to international events, do you think it's better for the United States to be more engaged and take the lead, or less engaged and react to events? 57% say they would prefer the United States be more engaged and lead, compared with 32% who would prefer the United States is less engaged and react. This one, it's actually a couple here. I think the wording is very interesting there. It's hard to imagine somebody saying, yes, I think the best thing for our country to do, or for me, or for my family, or our business, or anything to do, is to react. That seems like a hard one to really convince somebody of. So I wonder how much that wording actually comes into play in that aspect. But either way, 57%, it's the highest that it's ever been since this poll has been asked back in February of 2021. The highest prior to this was in May, where it was at 54%. But again, something to remember is that this poll was asked just after Trump was elected. So when people are answering these forward-looking questions, they're answering them with the understanding that these decisions, these actions will be made with a President Trump in office. The other one here, kind of high level, is they say, in general, do you think it's better for the United States to maintain military bases around the world to deter attacks and respond quickly if something happens? Or do you think the U.S. should reduce our military presence overseas and only deploy troops in response to aggression? 62% said we should maintain the bases, compared with 33% that said we should reduce our overseas presence. Again, and that's pretty consistent with, going back, it's between 62 and 66% in favor since it's been asked in 2019. I think some of that has to do with the wording as well, and I think they did a good job in the way they worded it. That's not manipulative at all. It's providing some context as to why those bases are actually over there. They serve a purpose. They do benefit the United States and our interests abroad, and I think it's beneficial for some of these questions to add a little bit more color to it than just a, 3 or 4 word question that's probably going to get an emotional type answer. Now, a couple here that were really cool, they are not, maybe cool is not the right way to put it, I thought were very interesting. How about that? So question 44, they said, which country do you see as the greatest threat to the United States? So 1, you can only pick 1. There's no numbering, 1 through 10 or anything like that. The number 1 top threat, greatest threat to the United States, China at 49%, far ahead of Russia at 26%. North Korea at 9, Iran at 6. The United States, ourselves, we are the greatest threat to ourselves, I guess, came in at 3%. Mexico caught 1%. Either way, going back to November 2023, this was wild. This was the month after the October 7th attacks. 1% of respondents in this poll said that Israel was the greatest threat to the United States. Think about that. Like, they were still cleaning up the effects from that attack, and a group of people in the United States said Israel is the greatest threat to the U.S. Anyways, moving on to some comparisons here between these different countries. They listed a bunch of countries here asking, how do you feel about them being an ally, something of an ally, or an enemy, essentially that. And if you look at the top here, they kind of break it out into total ally, total enemy. That's what I'm going to go off of. So right at the top as an example here, you've got Australia. To nobody's surprise, I actually thought this would be higher. 85% say Australia is an ally, and 7% say that they are an adversary. Feels like that number doesn't add up to where it should. Oh, there's a don't know. There we go. Got to factor in all the don't know answers here. So 85% view Australia as an ally, 7% view Australia as an enemy, which is quite the take. I don't know. But anyways, moving through here, it's not all that surprising. You've got China at 75% adversary, Russia 80% adversary or enemy. Here's where it gets interesting. Ukraine, 75% ally. That is greater than we view Taiwan. 67% viewed Taiwan as an ally compared with 75% for Ukraine, which is pretty interesting when you talk about, I feel like a big talking point, a major point of contention with any aid to Ukraine, and understandably so, is are we going to be able to defend someone like Taiwan if need be? I mean, given how intertwined our economy is with Taiwan, that's a very valid question. So it's interesting here to see that more people view Ukraine as an ally than Taiwan, but it's not just Taiwan. We've got, the United Kingdom, 87%, Israel at 72%. So more people view Ukraine than Israel as an ally. But Japan was one I wanted to point out. 73% view Japan as an ally. They're very close allies of the United States. More people view Ukraine than Japan as an ally of the United States right now. I think their relationships become a lot tighter in recent years, and probably not all that big of a shock. All right, now moving into a couple things about China here. Let's see, questions 60 through 69 here. They asked, in what case do you think the U.S. has superiority over China? In which case does China have superiority over the United States? And I want to jump down to 67 because this is one of those where you're going to get a heavy American bias here when you're asking Americans about, like, are we better at something than our adversaries? So it's not surprising at all to see when American voters say, yes, we're better than our enemy at certain things, or adversaries or competitors, however you want to view China. 67 was different here. With cyber capabilities, they actually said that China, 33% said China has superiority compared to 27% for the U.S. So this is, it's got everything: air forces, ground forces, Navy, space forces, economic, diplomatic, everything. They've got the United States leading except cyber. How about that? And then shifting down to questions 90 through 95, talking about what the United States might do if China invaded Taiwan. Big question, right? A lot of papers have been written about this. What should the policy be? What do we need to get ready in the event this happens at some point in the future? 73% support officially recognizing Taiwan as an independent country. 66% say sanction China. 56% say send more military equipment to Taiwan. 58% say move U.S. military assets such as aircraft carriers into the region. 51% say establish a no-fly zone in the area, which could involve shooting down Chinese warplanes. There's a big talk about portions of Ukraine right when the war kicked off, right? Should the U.S. put a no-fly zone over like western Ukraine and actually shoot down Russian jets if they enter that airspace? That there was never very much support in the United States for that. There were some calls, not a lot of domestic support. Right now, as it sits, 51% in favor of setting up a no-fly zone over what I would assume is portions of Taiwan. And then 48% actually say we should commit U.S. ground troops to the defense of Taiwan. Look, I don't know if that's up a fair amount from 39% in October 2019. It's the highest that it's ever been. I don't know exactly what's driving that right now, right? As we saw just a minute ago, there's still a lot of countries that people view as closer allies to the United States than Taiwan. But for any number of reasons, right now, there appears to be the most support that there's been in a long time in committing U.S. ground forces to a fight with China over Taiwan. The last piece here, shifting to the Middle East. Again, not a lot of surprising pieces here, so I just pulled out the ones that really caught my attention. They say, do you support or oppose the United States sending weapons to Israel? Total support, 54%. Total oppose, 39%. Kind of as expected. That's generally where that's sat throughout the war. But then they asked about Iran. They said, would you prefer that the next administration be more aggressive, less aggressive, or keep things about the same? 42% said more aggressive. 22% said less aggressive, and 26% said about the same. But that's all I got for now. Again, I will link all of these reports in the description below. There's a lot of detail there if you want to dig into it further. Just thought it was worth talking through at a high level. But thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.